it gives me great pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker. We are honored that FEMA Administrator Craig Fugate is here to address the dinner this year. He has had a prestigious career as a firefighter, paramedic, and emergency manager. Mr. Fugate has dedicated his life to keeping the citizens of his home state of Florida and all of America safe from all types of disasters. Mr. Fugate was previously the director of the Florida Division of Emergency Management. In 2009, he was appointed by President Barack Obama and confirmed by the United States Senate to serve as the administrator of the Federal Emergency Management Agency. Please welcome FEMA Administrator Craig Fugate.
Good evening. This is really for me. You know, those of you that come up to the ranks, you remember the first time they issued your bunker gear, and they gave you the pager, and that first call you went on. It's kind of what it feels like to be up here in front of my peers. I need to recognize some folks because we have, with all of the things going on, congressional leadership and their involvement in the program here, but particularly Congressman Hoyer and Congressman King that are here tonight with us. And then thanks Chief Compton for the introduction. Bill Webb and his team, you know, the CFSI. I can remember when I was back in Florida when this caucus first got going and the Institute became part of a voice that for the fire service recognized the value add. Also in the audience, some of the team at FEMA, Glenn Gaines, our acting administrator for the U.S. Fire Administration, and his leadership that he gives us. As a keynote speaker, you can oftentimes come in with your talking points and your canned speech, and I never really was any good at that. So I want to kind of talk from my experience and the importance, I think, as a nation, we have to recognize in people we call public servants. I'm hearing a lot of chatter out there, folks. And it's not always, I think, appropriate. I mean, yes, budgets are tough. Yes, hard decisions are having to be made. But sometimes I'm afraid that we sometimes hear rhetoric that fails to understand and value what it means to be a public servant, what it means to be somebody who is willing to serve their community, whether they are paid or a volunteer, and put themselves in a position that takes them away from their family and places them in situations most people would run from. That is public service. So we should never confuse tough budget decisions and things that must be done and confuse that with that public servants and their willingness to serve should never be a reason to talk about that service as a budget issue. Don't confuse the people that serve and their willingness to serve as a public servant. And look at the tough choices that are being made and don't recognize that sacrifice. I started out as a volunteer firefighter. I became a paramedic. I was a lieutenant in fire rescue. I remember when I got my lieutenant bars, I was now a manager. Boy, that was a change. It was really great when you could just be the guy that got to go do, you know, the stuff you're always doing, but you didn't have to manage. And that's probably about the time I recognized as my career began to progress, that when we talk about the fire service, the thing that is probably the most precious thing I learned from that was we're a team. Who can put out a fire by themselves? Who can do and save a cardiac patient by themselves? got to do it as a team, right? And as I went through my career, that's the thing I really began to appreciate about the fire service was we had to be a team, we had to trust each other, we all had strengths and weaknesses, but a good team, we always maximized our strengths and we minimized each individual weaknesses. And that kind of started this idea in my head as I moved up and got more opportunities. People said, what's the most important thing you learned in being an emergency manager? I said, learning that you got to build a team. And part of building that team is you got to empower people. You've got to go to your strengths. And so in my career, both in the county and then in the state of Florida, one of our strengths was our fire service. It had the ability to project itself into areas of absolute devastation with a team that could go in and perform a variety of functions. And that ability to do that was demonstrated in Florida in the 2004 hurricanes, when time after time after time, Florida was hit by hurricanes. And although many people oftentimes think about our great soldiers that serve in the National Guard being part of that response, they think of the law enforcement being part of that response. You know who usually was the first ones into the areas of devastation? Mutual aid fire companies doing search and rescue, bringing communication, bringing hope to people. In 2005, when Katrina struck, we were able to send assistance to our neighboring states, particularly Mississippi. In a response that was over about 6,500 people from Florida that went. A large percentage of those teams that went were firefighters. They came from small towns, big cities, county, rural, and they left their homes, they left their families, and they went to a neighboring state that was devastated and supported those communities in those initial days and weeks after that disaster. And we were able to do that because we were a team, and I knew the strength of that team. I knew the capabilities they had, and they had my trust and confidence that we could go into an area that quite literally most everything that you would depend upon had been impacted. And they could go in and they could remember why they were there, to help the survivors, to help their peers that were in the area of impact, and help them get back up so they could run and maintain the response in those communities. So as we talk about the fire service, when we look to the future, I'm always reminded that when an emergency occurs, when a disaster strikes, when somebody needs emergency help, the fire service has been there, the fire service is there, the fire service will be there in the future. We in Washington have to remember that it's not a trite expression when we say all disasters are local, because the closest response are the responders in the communities of impact and the assistance that comes to them from mutual aid. The other thing we have to remember when we talk about things such as all hazards, it doesn't imply that every disaster or every crisis is the same, because certainly in the fire service you train for a lot of different events. But last time I checked, the fire chief is still the fire chief no matter what the disaster is, right? So we need to build upon our local community plans, our local community capabilities. We need to recognize that our job in Washington is to support the response based upon the expertise and resources at the local level, and to bring in a support through the states that augments, supports, but doesn't supplant the leadership you provide and the expertise you have in your communities. And then the last thing I wanted to say is that in building this team that I'm now honored to serve here at FEMA, and we talk about all disasters are local, that all hazards mean the leadership and the response is going to be locally driven, and we're going to support that, is a final recognition that the public's part of the team. We oftentimes talk about how we need to get the public more engaged in the day-to-day activities to be better prepared. Yet in many cases, we have to also acknowledge that's actually occurring already in the fire service. From the things you do every day to work on fire prevention, community emergency response team training, doing things in your community that go far and above and beyond just a response phase of supporting your citizens and getting them prepared is a key focus that we want to embrace. We see the public as part of the team, we see them as a resource, and we see the fire service as a natural way to reach the public to encourage preparedness. Because we all know responding to a cardiac arrest where nobody started CPR is oftentimes futile. We know that when we roll up on the scene and people haven't gotten out of their homes and nobody's checked, it's going to be a bad one. We know that we bring expertise to people in their time of need, but the better prepared they are, most of us would much rather not have to respond to some of those calls if people had taken the steps themselves to be better prepared. So, the honor and that feeling from that first time you went out on your call, the honor of being able to address my peers in the fire service, and the opportunity to recognize the service every day in every community that you and the members you represent perform is truly an honor. I thank you for the opportunity. I pray that when we go to the National Fallen Firefighters Memorial, there'll be fewer names. But let no one ever forget people gave their lives to save their fellow man. That is a value we must recognize that the fire service provides every day in their communities across this country. Thank you, and thank your members for their service.
Craig, come on back. I'm Jim Eastep from the CFSI Board of Directors. On behalf of the nation's fire and emergency services, we want to thank you for having the toughest job in the country, just about. But more importantly, you are one of us. You are a volunteer, you are in the career service, and you know what we go through every day, and you've devoted your life to saving lives. Thank you on behalf not only of CFSI and those in attendance tonight, but the nation for the service that you've rendered.
This is an honor. I only ever got a yellow helmet. This is my first white helmet. Thank you.